This is a list of groups whose meetings are not required to be open to the public. Is anybody in here on any of these boards? You are? Wow.
I'm on Idaho Board of Tax Appeals.
Idaho Board of Tax Appeals. We've broken the streak. We were, one of these presentations, we're 30-0 on people ever being on those boards, and now we finally had one. Congratulations.
Is that going to add 30 minutes to this evening? By
And bad news, now we can't take this slide out.
I have a question about that one.
Sure.
Would you back up? Meetings not required to be open to the public. Does that mean those entities have the option, like the Public Utility Commission, they can choose to
They
have
have-
an open meeting?
Well, they have specific things that they can do not in an open
Right.
meeting. They don't have to comply with it. They can have they deal with their business and everything is, the law in and of
Because while
itself
they're
doesn't apply to them.
not required, that doesn't mean they have to be closed.
Right. What it really means is that the law as a whole doesn't apply to them. And is that if they don't do something under the open meeting law, it's not a violation.
the state legislature?
State legislature, the statute on its face does not apply to them because they're not created by statute. They're created by Constitution. And the body under the Constitution applies their own set of rules. Now, they also, the Constitution says their meetings shall not be in private. They have to be open. And they use the Public Records Act as the basis for their openness of their meetings. Now, some of them are open, some of them are not. I'm not going to get into that debate. The answer is they get to play by their own set of rules.
Both houses have within their respective rules, rules that require their committee meetings to be generally open. They've got some exceptions for executive sessions and whatnot, but they generally follow the open meetings laws through application of their respective bodies' rules.
But not the caucuses.
Well, the caucuses aren't even the legislature. That's
No.
just a group of political party
Yes,
affiliates.
exactly.
But in some states, a caucus, they have a law where a caucus can't.
That is true.
It has to be
Yep.
public.
That's true, but
I
not
think we ought
Idaho.
to have that in Idaho.
I agree, I agree.
So,
But there is one section about the legislature and the committee specifically in the open meeting.
yep, there is. And that doesn't apply. So one of the, when you get into the conduct of the meeting, every meeting is required to have minutes. One of the questions, weirdly, that we had to address through the Idaho Supreme Court was the requirement that the taking of written minutes meant that the bodies had to take the minutes in writing. I know that you're sitting there thinking, it says written minutes, why would we argue over whether or not they had to be in writing? But we went all the way to the Idaho Supreme Court to have the Idaho Supreme Court said written minutes means in writing, on paper. The argument was we record all of our meetings and therefore we comply with the minutes requirement. The problem is a recording is not the minutes of the meeting. The same thing is if you transcribe the meeting, that's a transcription of the meeting, not the minutes. The law requires what has to be in the minutes. All members of the governing body present, all motions, resolutions, orders, or ordinances, and their disposition, and the results of all votes. We get asked a lot of times, what's an example of good minutes? Can I see an example of what good minutes look like? The very best source I can give you for an example of good meeting minutes is the Idaho Legislature's committee minutes. You can go online, pull up any committee, and take a look through their minutes. They do a great job on all of their meeting minutes. And a couple of things that the legislature includes within their meeting minutes is not just this information of who's present, but they also include who steps up to the podium and the general tenor of what their statements are. And so anytime you have a question of what happened in those committee meetings, you can go back and review the minutes and almost see it unfold right in front of you in a very short, brief version. Executive sessions.
Can I
Yes,
just,
sir.
the bit about the recording of the meeting, can it legally work to use voice recognition software to create a written document? So as we speak, our voice can, be recorded.
So again,
but
what
then
you would be
it
getting.
can then be printed into written
Right,
words.
again, what you would be getting is you would be getting a transcription of the meeting, not the minutes of the meeting. The minutes are
Have to include-
an abbreviated version of what transpired at the meeting. The other thing that I will tell you is that anybody who's used any version of voice recognition software recognizes that what the recognition software recognizes and what you actually said are kind of in opposite corners of this room.
Sure, you'd have to still,
And so, the real key though is that what you're getting is a transcription of what occurred at the meeting. Those have to be abbreviated into a minute form.
but can the person doing the recording, the physical typing up of the meeting, use that to augment the minutes, to make it a thicker package?
Sure, I mean, the bare minimum though is that you do have to have something called the minutes of the meeting. Executive sessions are permitted, and an executive session has several requirements. The first is you have to have a motion to go into executive session that identifies the specific subsection authorizing the executive session. Then you have to have a roll call vote of at least 2/3 of the governing body. And so if you have a 5-person board, how many votes do you need to go into executive session?
4.
I didn't get the same answer from everybody.
You said 2/3,
Is it 2/3?
2/3.
not 60%?
3 is 60%, that's right. That's our golden star for math tonight. 4 is what you need, because 3 is only 60%. 2/3 is what percentage? 66.66666. So you need 2/3 vote. Always be aware of that within boards. One of the questions that we get oftentimes on the vote to go into executive session, what if I don't think we should be going into executive session? What do I do in that scenario? Well, the first thing you should do is vote against going into the executive session. And you probably want to state on the record why it is that you're opposed to going into that executive session. So let's say you're on that 5-member council. You vote against going into the executive session. You say, I don't think we should go in there. They vote to go into the executive session. It's 4-1. They've got their 2/3. What do you do now? And here I think you've got a choice to make. The choice for you to make is, do I go in there and keep an eye on the guys that I think are violating the law so I at least know what they're up to? Or do you say, you know what, I'm worried about us violating the open meeting law and I don't want to get drugged down with the rest of the shit? I don't have an answer for you on that, by the way. I know.
Talk to
Great.
a lawyer.
Great presentation, thanks, man. Really helped us out here. What I will tell you is that if I were in an enforcement position, which I sometimes find myself in, and I had somebody that voted against going into an executive session, probably the first person I'm going to talk to is the person that voted against going into the executive session. I'm going to say, hey, what's going on here? Why did you vote against it? And then from an enforcement perspective, understanding the goal is compliance, do you want to go after the person for a penalty that voted against going into the executive session? Or is it more plausible that you need to enforce the law and work on compliance with the folks that went into the illegal executive session? And so that's the evaluation that I would probably undertake as I was reviewing it. Now, recognizing that you have your own prosecutor, you may want to have that discussion with them to find out how they would evaluate it. That was just a...
Well, there shall be a roll call vote on the motion to go into executive session. Now, what if you just put it on the agenda that there's going to be an executive session halfway through the meeting?
There still has to be a motion and a vote. And so before any executive session, you have to have the motion to go into the executive session, state the specific subsection, and then have the roll call vote. And so just because it's on the agenda, that's only step one. Now you've got these other steps that you have to comply with. So now we're going to go through a few of the reasons for why you can go into an executive session. And as we go through the reasons for why you can go into an executive session, something very important comes out of every single one of these reasons. So for the first one, when hiring a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual agent. And I want to key your attention to hiring a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual agent. That to me means that you have to be discussing a specific position, a specific need that's going to be fulfilled. And so for example, that is not an exemption to go in and discuss vacancies in general or staffing needs. I think we need to add 4 employees. That's the kind of stuff that should be done in open session. Once you identify the position and the candidates for the position, you can then evaluate them within the executive session. Same thing in the next one. Consider the
Ron, if I may, on the first one,
Sure.
is that just persons, or does that also apply to contractors? 4 engineering firms answer a city's request for proposals. The city is of a size that they don't have staff to work it up, so the council themselves are going to discuss it and make a decision. If they wish to do that in executive session, is that permitted?
If it's a specific contractor, I think they would be acting as an individual agent,
Okay.
probably, most likely. Yeah.
What about if for example, the county commissioners are not hiring somebody, but talking about applicants to appoint to a county board?
As long as it's a specific position, meaning you can identify the board and the position that they're being appointed to, and you're evaluating specific applicants for that board, you're probably okay.
It
It's when
seems like
gets more-
it complies with the spirit of it. It's just the use of the word hiring, if you're not actually hiring.
Yeah, and that provision has been used for that purpose.
All right, thank you.
Sure. The next one, consider evaluation, dismissal, or disciplining of, or hear complaints against a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual. Again, there's a specific person that you can point to. And so when you're thinking about it and explaining it, you should always be able to say, we went into executive session to evaluate John Smith. And even though you may not disclose the name, you should know the name in case somebody asks you about it. You should be able to say, yep, there was a person, we can identify who it was. As far as contractors and stuff, I sit on a few boards where we have an investment manager, and we've hired someone to evaluate the investment manager. We go into an executive session for that evaluation to make sure that what they're telling us is right, make sure they're accurate in their investment management advice and all those sorts of things.
But Brian, I'm on the State Board of Education, and you know, we were gonna talk about hiring somebody, and we found out we didn't have enough money to do that, so, you know, we had to solve this problem.
Yes, Mr. Attorney General, that is what we call executive session drift. And to me, that's one of the cautionary notes whenever you go into these executive sessions, is you want to make sure you can stay on the topic that you went into the executive session for. And so, for example, if you go in to evaluate candidates for a position, and you say, okay, we're going to hire a new executive director. Let's pay the executive director $58,000 a year. Somebody says, well, we can't pay him $58,000 a year because we don't have enough money. Well, why don't we have enough money? Now, all of a sudden, do you see how you've gotten off topic? Because now you're talking about the budget in general. And so it's really important that you stay on topic. The scenario that the Attorney General referenced was one that happened exactly in that fashion. They went in to fill a specific vacancy within the state board. Then somebody asked a question. They said, well, if we're filling this one, how come we're not filling the other vacancies? Well, we have a lot of vacancies. Well, why do we have a lot of vacancies? Well, our budget is bad. Well, why is our budget bad? And they were just off and running. And so that, again, is an example of how easy it is to kind of drift off of an executive session topic. And I think it's important that whenever you go in there, You have somebody that's willing to kind of be the bad guy and say, hey guys, we're getting a little off topic. We need to either come back to the topic or we need to go back into executive session.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
Executive session topics, is it only permitted to have one topic per executive session? Or if you make it listed on the agenda that it's for subsection this and subsection that, and then the motion says that it's for whatever, and you can have.
Yeah, you can go into executive, okay, as long
So
as
you
you
said
do it-
topic, but
Yeah, as
you-
long as you do it properly, you can go into an executive session for more than one
One topic,
purpose.
yeah, okay.
The real key is for you to then, while you're in the executive session, make sure you understand when you've stopped discussing topic A,
And then you-
move on to topic B, and then move on to topic C. And one of the things that I always recommend for folks, because you do have to keep minutes of an executive session, is to note in the minutes, discussion of 672345C ended, discussion of 672345B started, and then ended, and then started, and then ended. And that way, folks can see, okay, we went into executive session and followed each one of the purposes for the executive session. Yes?
You do have to keep minutes of executive session,
Yes, you do.
and who and how are they kept?
So, the minutes of an executive session may be one of the all-time most frustrating set of minutes on the face of the earth. Because you have to keep minutes under the law, but you don't have to keep minutes that defeat the purpose of the executive session. And so a lot of times, the minutes of an executive session will say, executive session was convened and deliberations concerning negotiations were discussed.
Period.
Period. That's it. You've
Brian,
now
might
complied with the
those
statute.
executive session minutes perhaps also say the starting and ending time?
They could say the starting and ending time so folks know, okay, you were in executive session for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or a day and a half. Probably not a good sign if you're in there for a day and a half.
Are those minutes part of the regular meeting minutes?
Yes,
Not a separate sheet of paper
no. Although
filed
I've
under
seen,
executive session
you can
minutes?
do it either way, but if the executive session is part of a regular meeting, you might as well keep them with your regular meeting minutes. I have seen examples where folks use an executive session minute and then they have the regular meeting minutes. As long as you've got minutes, you've complied with the law. The law doesn't say they've got to be together or neat or bolded or Times Roman font or anything.
One more question, Brian. Is it appropriate, as some agencies have done in the past, to just put on every agenda, we may have an executive session on any of these topics, 1 through 8, and then when you go in, say, we're going to have an executive session on one of these topics, 1 through 8, and never specify which?
No, Betsy, that's not appropriate. Laundry list executive sessions are not, the agenda should be all probable items of discussion. If it's not probable that you're going to discuss an item, for example, you've got on there to conduct deliberations concerning labor negotiations, and you're an entity that doesn't even have a labor agreement, that's a red flag. And so, but folks do that. They just laundry list all of those things out there. And you want to be as specific as possible because, again, the purpose is to allow the public notice of the probable items of discussion.